before the first light touched the mesas, before even the roosters dared to call. A silence settled across the frontier that was too deep, too heavy to be natural. The kind of silence that presses against the chest and slows the breath, as if the earth itself were holding back, bracing for what was to come. Out there, beyond the last split-rail fence of the ranches and the last lantern glow of the town, the wilderness stretched endless and raw. And on its edge, in a hollow carved by time and wind, stood a cabin so frail it looked as though the next storm might tear it apart. But that night, the danger did not ride on wind or storm. It rode on hooves. In the black seam where night broke into the faintest line of silver dawn, figures gathered on horseback, dark, silent, and still. They did not shuffle, did not cough, did not shift their weight as ordinary men might. They were statues against the horizon, 100 strong, each with eyes fixed upon the crooked little cabin. Their painted shields glimmered in the half-light, their rifles slung across their backs, their spears resting upright like a forest of sharpened trees. They did not announce themselves. They did not charge. They simply waited, as patient and inevitable as death. Inside, a boy slept fitfully, unaware of the judgment gathering outside his door. 16 years old, nameless to most, with nothing to his credit but hunger, grit, and the stubborn will to see another sunrise. But on this morning, the sun itself seemed to hesitate, as though it, too, feared what that boy might choose when he opened his eyes. The frontier was not a place for the weak, and every line of its landscape spoke of hardship. The land stretched bare and merciless, a quilt of sand and sagebrush cut through by dry creek beds and jagged canyons where shadows lingered long after the sun had risen. Heat shimmered off the flats in summer, and in winter the winds came screaming down from the mountains, rattling every loose nail, every warped plank of wood, like a warning from the Almighty. The horizon always seemed a little too far away, like a promise you could ride toward for days and never reach. Wagon ruts scarred the prairie where settlers had passed, their bones often left behind when thirst or arrows or fever claimed them. The town, a scatter of false front buildings clinging to the rail spur, was the only flicker of civilization within 100 miles. Its saloon lamps still guttered from last night's whiskey fires, and the church bell, cracked from a lightning strike, seldom rang anymore. Out here, law was thin and life was thinner. And there, miles from the nearest voice, stood the boy's cabin. It was hardly worthy of the name, for walls of scavenged timber leaned inward like tired shoulders, their seams stuffed with mud to keep out the wind. A roof of mismatched shingles and rusted tin clattered with every breeze, as if reminding the boy how fragile his shelter truly was. Inside, the floor was little more than packed earth, scattered with old horse blankets that served as bed, chair, and table alike. A dented pot hung above a fire pit that smoked more than it burned. The place carried the sharp smell of creosote and ashes, and the sour musk of loneliness. The boy had built it piece by piece with whatever the land grudgingly surrendered. Driftwood from the river, nails pulled from abandoned wagons, scraps begged off ranchers too busy to care what a stray child did with their trash. And though it was crooked and small, it was his. No sheriff could tell him to move along. No saloon-keeper could throw him out. No rancher could dock his pay and leave him to sleep in the dust. It was the one corner of the earth that belonged to him, though it trembled at every storm and sagged under every gust. On nights when the wind howled across the plains and the coyotes yipped in the gullies, the boy would sit at the doorway, staring out into the blackness. He wondered what kind of man he might grow into if he lived long enough to grow at all. Most days he doubted it. Hunger hollowed him, and loneliness wore on him harder than hunger ever could. A boy without kin in a land like this was like a lantern without oil, burning dimmer each night, fated to go dark sooner than most. And yet, despite the fragility of the place, the cabin stood, stubborn as the boy who called it home. It was a mark scratched into the wilderness that said, "I am here. I exist. You may forget my name, you may leave me hungry, you may cast me aside, but I will not vanish." And so, as the riders gathered at dawn, watching from the tree-lean, they did not just face a boy and a shack of rotting wood. They faced the last, trembling outpost of a soul that refused to disappear. He was not yet a man, though the land had tried to force him into manhood long before his time. 16 years, perhaps 17, he couldn't say for certain. There was no Bible record, no gravestone with his people's names upon it. Just vague memories of a mother's song carried off by fever and a father's boots left empty in a trail dusted red. After that, nothing but the ache of growing up with no one to call his own. To the townsfolk, he was a shadow. They saw him dart between corrals and smokehouses, thin as a fence post, hair tangled with dust, eyes always watching. They called him Stray. Sometimes with pity, more often with scorn. A stray was what you called a dog without a master, and the name clung to him like burrs in a blanket. If he took odd work, sweeping saloon floors after brawls, mending fence posts for a rancher too stingy to hire a man, they paid him in leftovers or coins not worth the weight in his pocket. Yet he endured. Hunger taught him to endure. Nights on the hard ground, cold winds rattling through the shingles, taught him to endure. And in that endurance a quiet stubbornness took root. He did not cry when insulted. He did not beg when turned away. He kept his silence, his head bowed, and his eyes sharp. In those eyes, there was a fire that frightened even men who mocked him, because fire was dangerous when it had nothing to lose. Still, he was young. When he sat by his fire, staring into the flames, dreams sometimes came unbidden. Dreams of belonging, of being called by name, of riding with a family that welcomed him to their table. At dawn, those dreams scattered like smoke. He would rise, shoulders aching from the cold, and remind himself that dreams fed no belly and kept no wolves away. His days blurred into the rhythm of survival. Hauling water from the river, setting traps in the gullies for rabbits, trading pelts for flour that never stretched far enough. When work could be found, he took it. When it could not, he stole hours of sleep in the hayloft or under a freight wagon. He was a boy living in a world that asked for men, and it weighed on him. Every nail he hammered into the cabin, every meal of boiled roots or stale cornbread, was a statement against the grave that beckoned with open arms. But for all his loneliness, for all his want, there lingered something tender in him, something he did not often show. He had been known to leave scraps of jerky for a half-starved dog that prowled the alley behind the saloon. Once, when a ranch hand dropped a sack of grain, the boy had knelt to help him gather it, though the man sneered at him afterward. These small acts were seeds, buried deep, waiting for a moment to rise. No one in town expected much of the stray. The sheriff watched him with a weary eye, waiting for the day he turned outlaw. The ranchers muttered that he would come to no good, that hunger would one day drive him to steal a horse or pull a knife. They thought him weak. They thought him invisible. They thought the frontier would swallow him like it had swallowed so many nameless souls before. But fate has a way of finding the forgotten. And for this boy, fate would arrive on the banks of a river, carried in the arms of a dying woman, in the breath of a child too young to understand the storm it carried in its tiny chest. It happened on a night when the moon was little more than a sliver, hiding behind clouds that moved like black ships across the sky. The boy had gone down to the river with a snare in hand, hoping to catch something, anything, that might fill his belly. The water moved sluggish and dark, swollen from recent rains, whispering against the banks like it carried secrets it dared not speak aloud. He was kneeling in the reeds, checking one of his traps, when he heard it. Not the cry of a bird or the splash of a fish, but the low, broken moan of human breath. He froze, heart thudding. Out here, sounds in the night could mean danger. An outlaw bleeding from a gunfight, a drunk ranch hand too far from town, or worse, a trick meant to draw him out. But curiosity was stronger than fear, and hunger had dulled the sharp edge of his caution. He moved toward the sound. There, half submerged at the water's edge, lay a woman. Her hair clung to her face, dark and matted, her skin pale as the moonlight that managed to break through the clouds. She was dressed in buckskin, torn and soaked, the fringe heavy with river water. The boy knew at once she was native. His breath caught, for he had been raised on stories. Stories of raids, of scalps taken, of ranches burned. But none of those stories had prepared him for the sight of this woman, broken and fading, clutching something to her chest. He knelt beside her, hands trembling. "Ma'am?" he whispered, though he knew she could not understand his words. Her lips moved, forming sounds in her own tongue, the syllables sharp and musical, yet weakened by pain. She turned her head toward him, and for a moment her eyes locked with his. They were wide, dark, and filled not with fear, but with something older, something like trust. It was then he saw the bundle in her arms. A child, swaddled in deerskin, cheeks flushed with fever but still breathing. The boy felt his stomach twist. He had nothing, barely enough to keep himself alive. What could he do with a baby? And yet, as if reading his thoughts, the woman forced the bundle into his arms. Her strength was failing, but her intent was clear. She pressed her hand against his chest, against the place where his heart beat, and whispered one final word, soft, urgent, slipping from her cracked lips like a prayer. Then her hand fell away. The boy sat stunned, the weight of the infant suddenly heavier than stone. He wanted to lay it down, to run, to let the river carry both bodies away so he would not have to carry this burden. But he couldn't. The child stirred against him, small fists curling, a tiny whimper rising from its throat. That sound pierced him deeper than any knife could. For the first time in his life, someone needed him. He looked down at the mother, her face already slack in death, then back at the child. "Damn it!" he whispered into the night, voice cracking. "I'll keep you safe. I don't know how, but I will." He rose, the baby pressed against his chest, and staggered back toward the cabin. Every shadow along the trail seemed to reach for him. Every gust of wind carried whispers of danger. He knew in his bones that by taking this child, he had crossed into something larger than himself, something that would not let him go. And as he pushed open the cabin door, laying the child on the worn horse blanket that served as his bed, the first embers of destiny caught flame in the hearth of his heart. By the time the boy rose from his cot the next morning, the child was still sleeping, bundled in the only blanket he owned. He had barely closed his eyes through the night, watching the small chest rise and fall, wondering what kind of trouble he had dragged into his fragile world. When the sun pushed its way over the horizon, he knew he could not hide it for long. Out here, secrets had shorter lives than men. By midday, word was already running like wildfire through the town. A ranch hand had seen him carrying the bundle from the river. Another claimed he'd glimpsed the woman's lifeless form half hidden among the reeds. In a place where fear was currency, gossip bought more than gold. And so the boy, nameless and hungry, found himself at the center of every hushed whisper. The blacksmith was the first to speak it plain. He stood outside his forge, wiping soot from his brow, when the boy passed with the child in his arms. His eyes narrowed, and he spat into the dirt. "That's a blood debt you don't want, boy." His tone was sharp, not cruel but certain, like he was naming the outcome before it came. The sheriff saw him next, leaning against the post outside his office, hat pulled low, thumbs hooked in his belt. His gaze lingered on the bundle, then drifted up to meet the boy's wary eyes. "You don't know what you've stepped into, stray," he said, voice calm but weighted. "Best let me take that child. Folks are riled up enough without you stirring the pot." But the boy shook his head, clutching the bundle tighter. His throat felt raw, yet he forced the words out. "It ain't yours to take." The sheriff studied him a long moment, jaw tightening. Then he shrugged, though the tension in his shoulders betrayed him. "Suit yourself. But don't expect me to clean up the mess." By nightfall, the saloon was thick with talk. Men hunched over cheap whiskey, voices low but urgent. "He's harboring one of theirs," a rancher muttered, his mustache twitching. "Means trouble for all of us." Another slammed his glass down hard. "A stray boy ain't worth a raid on our herds." Laughter followed, but it was brittle, like dry twigs snapping in the fire. Fear sat in every corner of that room, disguised as anger. Even women in the mercantile clucked their tongues, whispering of curses and vengeance. "No good will come of it," one said. "Mark me, He'll bring the warriors down on all our heads. Children pointed when he walked by, some with curiosity, some with spite. The boy felt the weight of every stare. He walked through town with the child pressed against his chest, his stomach twisted into knots. He had always been invisible, but invisibility was safer than this. Now every eye followed him. Now every whisper sharpened into a blade. That night, as he returned to his cabin, the sky bruised with twilight, he caught sight of smoke rising from the ridges. Not the thin smoke of a ranch fire, but thick columns, sending signals into the darkening heavens. His blood ran cold. He knew enough of the old stories to recognize what it meant. Someone was watching and someone was calling. He stepped inside, shut the crooked door, and sank to his knees beside the fire pit. The child stirred and whimpered, but did not wake. The boy pressed his hands over his face, trembling. He had not asked for this. He had no food, no plan, no allies. And yet he could not let go. Something inside him, small but stubborn, had already bound him to this child. The town would not protect him. The law would not save him. And somewhere beyond the horizon, warriors were already gathering. Far beyond the dusty town, deeper than the cattle trails and the wagon ruts, the land opened into a canyon carved by centuries of wind and water. There, at the heart of the stone walls, a fire crackled beneath a sky thick with stars. Sparks leapt upward like restless spirits, and around the flames sat the people of the woman who had died on the riverbank. The air was heavy with mourning. Women keened softly, voices rising and falling with the rhythm of grief. Men sat in silence, faces painted with ash, their weapons lying within reach. A drum beat slow and steady, the sound echoing off the canyon walls like the throb of a wounded heart. Every note seemed to say the same thing. A life had been taken, and a debt now hung in the air. At the center of the circle lay the woman's body, wrapped in hide, her hair combed smooth and oiled despite the dirt and blood. A child's cries could be heard in the distance, faint but insistent, reminding every ear of what had been left behind. The elders leaned close, their voices hushed. They spoke of honor, of bloodlines, of duty to protect their own. But they also spoke of something more troubling. The boy. A scout had followed his tracks. From the riverbank to the crooked cabin, the trail was clear. And though no one could say whether he had stolen the child or saved it, the truth mattered less than the symbol. To let such a thing pass unchallenged would mark them as weak. To demand retribution risked setting fire to an already smoldering frontier. The chief listened to every word, his face carved with grief and fury. His daughter had been the one to die by the river, leaving behind her only child. His voice, when it finally came, was like stone cracking. "This boy," he said, "has placed himself between us and what is ours. Whether he meant to or not, the choice is his. He will answer for it." The warriors stirred. Some nodded, eager for vengeance, for the chance to ride hard and remind the settlers that the earth was not yet theirs to claim. Others frowned, uneasy, remembering that sometimes fate worked in ways men could not understand. Perhaps the boy had been chosen by the spirits to shield the child, to carry it through danger until it could return to its people. Who was bold enough to claim to know the will of the spirits? Yet even those who doubted did not argue when the call went out. 100 warriors, mounted and armed, rode from the canyon in silence. Their hooves struck sparks on stone, their shadows long against the moonlit earth. They did not howl, they did not chant, they did not announce themselves to the night. They were as silent as the storm before it breaks, as certain as the river before it floods. And as they rode, the campfires behind them burned lower, until only embers glowed, pulsing faintly in the dark. The canyon was quiet once more, but the quiet was not peace. It was the hush of a world that knew a reckoning was already on the wind. Back in his cabin, the boy felt a chill pass through him, though no draft stirred the air. He pressed the child closer to his chest, staring at the crooked door as if it might burst open at any moment. He could not hear the hooves, not yet, but he felt them, like a shadow racing toward his fragile life. The days that followed carried a tension that every soul on the frontier could feel, though no one spoke of it plain. It was in the way the ranchers worked their herds, eyes always flicking to the ridgelines. It was in the way mothers pulled their children closer when the boy passed through town with the bundle in his arms. Even the air seemed to hang heavier, as though waiting for a thunderhead to break. At first, the boy thought he could stay quiet, slip through the cracks as he always had. But this was different. Stray boys were tolerated when they were invisible. With the child clutched against his chest, he was no longer a shadow. He was a spark threatening to catch fire. The whispers sharpened. Outside the mercantile, two men spoke in tones meant to carry. "Mark me," one said. "That kid's dragging trouble straight to our doors. We can't let it fester." Another spat in the dirt. "I've got cattle worth more than a stray's life. If it's them or us, I say we hand him over." The sheriff tried once more, his patience thin as rawhide. He found the boy hauling water from the trough, his face drawn, his arms trembling with the weight of the bucket. "Son," the lawman said, softer this time, "it ain't about you. It's about keeping blood off this town. Give me the child. I'll see it's taken care of proper." But the boy only tightened his grip on the bundle, jaw locked. "It ain't yours to give." The sheriff's eyes narrowed, his hand brushing the butt of his revolver, though he didn't draw. "Don't mistake stubbornness for bravery. One'll get you through a cold night. The other'll put you in the ground." Then he turned, boots grinding in the dust, leaving the boy with nothing but the sting of his words. By the week's end, a posse had formed. Not the law's doing. No, this was ranchers and townsfolk taking matters into their own calloused hands. They rode out in the dim light of evening, rifles strapped across their backs, muttering of justice, of preemptive strikes, of protecting what was theirs. Dust rose behind them in a long line as they made for the crooked cabin at the edge of the wilderness. The boy saw them coming from his doorway, the baby whimpering softly against him. His stomach knotted, his throat closed, and yet he stepped outside, barefoot on the hard ground. He said nothing when they reined in their horses. A rancher with a scar across his cheek leaned forward in the saddle. "Hand it over, boy. You're meddling in business bigger than you. That child don't belong to you." The boy swallowed hard, voice shaking but firm. "Don't belong to you neither." A murmur passed through the group, some angry, some almost admiring. But admiration would not hold back fear. The scarred man spat into the dirt. "Suit yourself. But don't cry when the storm breaks. You'll have brought it on your own head." As the posse rode back toward town, the boy's legs gave out beneath him. He sank to the ground, clutching the child as though sheer will could protect them both. He looked up at the horizon, where the ridges were painted red by sunset. Thin columns of smoke rose against the darkening sky. Not ranch smoke, not campfire smoke, signal fires. He knew enough to understand. The warriors had seen. The warriors had heard. He was no longer caught between suspicion and rumor. Now he stood in the crosshairs of two worlds, each ready to claim what they believed was theirs. That night, the wind rattled the loose tin of the cabin roof like bones shaken in a gambler's cup. The boy sat alone by the lantern, its weak flame throwing long shadows across the dirt floor. The child lay on his cot, wrapped in his only blanket, sleeping fitfully, breath catching now and then in small whimpers. Each sound gnawed at the boy's nerves, reminding him of the promise he had made by the river, a promise he had no strength to keep. He pressed his hands to his face, fingers black with dirt, palms trembling. His mind turned circles like a wheel stuck in the mud. Why had he taken the child? Why hadn't he turned back, left it for the river, for the coyotes, for the earth itself to decide? That would have been easier. That would have been the way of survival. But when he closed his eyes, he saw her, dark hair clinging to her face, eyes burning even as the last of her breath slipped away. He felt again the press of her hand against his chest, the final word she spoke, a word he did not understand but carried like a brand burned into his ribs. She had chosen him. Whether by fate or desperation, she had chosen him. And in that choice lay a burden heavier than any he had ever carried. His thoughts turned bitter. "I'm no father. I'm no protector. Hell, I can't even feed myself." He whispered the words into the silence, his voice breaking like dry wood. His shoulders hunched, as if the weight of the whole prairie pressed down upon him. For so long, he had been invisible, slipping between the notice of men. Now, both the town and the tribe watched his every step, waiting for him to falter. The lantern flickered, casting the cabin in darkness for a moment before sparking back to life. In that heartbeat of shadow, he imagined the future. The posse would return, rifles gleaming in the morning sun, demanding once more what he could not give. And from the ridges, the riders would come, 100 strong, silent as death, ready to reclaim what they believed was theirs. He was no match for either. One boy, one child, one broken cabin against 2 storms. His breath caught, his chest aching. He thought of running. He could pack the child in an old sack, sling it across his shoulder, and vanish into the wilderness. He could find a cave, a canyon, a hidden creek, and live like a ghost until hunger took them both. But even as the thought formed, he dismissed it. The land out there swallowed men whole, and a child's cry carried farther than any gunshot. There was no hiding from what hunted him now. So he sat, trapped in the narrowing circle of firelight, torn between survival and sacrifice. If he handed the child to the sheriff, the town might forgive him, let him fade once more into shadow. But he knew in his bones that the child would never live to see another winter under their care. If he gave the child to the warriors, perhaps they would leave him be. But perhaps not. A stray boy who meddled in matters of blood was not easily forgiven. His gaze drifted back to the cot. The child had stilled, its face soft and untroubled in sleep. Something stirred in the boy's chest, something he had buried for years beneath hunger and fear. It was not courage. It was not strength. It was something smaller but no less dangerous. It was the first spark of love. And as the lantern flame guttered low, he realized the truth. Whatever choice he made, his life was no longer his own. The first light of dawn crept across the plains like a blade sliding free from its sheath. A pale mist clung to the ground, curling around the sage and scrub, hiding what waited beyond sight. The boy had not slept. He sat on the cabin's splintered porch with the child in his arms, his eyes raw from the weight of the night. Every nerve in his body was strung tight, every sound magnified. The sigh of the wind, the creak of the timbers, the far-off cry of a hawk. It began with hoofbeats, slow at first, then gathering in rhythm until the earth itself seemed to tremble. He looked to the horizon and saw them. A dark line stretching across the ridges, horses moving in silence, riders poised like shadows given flesh. One by one, they descended, fanning out across the flats, 100 warriors forming a living wall. Their spears caught the newborn sun, flashing cold light into his eyes. At the same time, another sound rose behind him, the rattle of wagons, the bark of men, the metallic jangle of rifles being cocked. He turned to see the townsfolk advancing, a posse of ranchers, shopkeepers, and the sheriff at their head. Dust rose in their wake, choking the dawn with grit and smoke. They dismounted not 50 yards from the cabin, forming their own line, guns leveled, faces hard with fear and anger. The boy's cabin now sat in the dead space between 2 worlds, each armed, each silent, each waiting for the other to strike. He felt the child stir, sensed the heat of its small body pressed against his chest, and his heart hammered so hard he thought it might split him open. The sheriff stepped forward first. His voice carried across the hush, steady though the tension bent it sharp. "Stray," he called. "You hand over that child now, and no blood spills today. Do it quick, boy. This ain't a fight you can stand in." The boy's mouth was dry as sand. He wanted to speak, but no words came. His throat locked, his knees shook, yet his arms tightened around the bundle as though instinct knew what his courage could not say. Then, from the opposite side, a single horse rode forward. The chief himself, towering in the saddle, his face carved by grief and fury. He raised a hand, palm open to the rising sun, and his voice cut across the plains like thunder. "The child is of my blood. Return it and you may live. Defy us, and you will be swept away like dust on the wind. The boy's heart lurched. Both voices pulled at him. Both carried the same promise. Surrender or be destroyed. Yet he knew surrender was no salvation. To give the child to either side was to lose it forever, swallowed by revenge or mistrust. He looked at the two walls of men, each bristling with weapons, each standing in judgment of him, and he knew that his choice would be carved into the bones of this land. A hush fell, heavy and unbearable. No bird sang, no breeze stirred. Only the child's cry pierced the silence, thin but sharp, as if demanding the world listen. And in that cry, every rifle tightened its aim, every spear lowered, every trigger finger curled. The standoff had begun. The silence between the two lines pressed down on the boy until it felt like a noose tightening around his throat. His knees quivered, his chest heaved, yet his arms refused to loosen their hold on the child. He could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears, louder than the hoofbeats, louder than the whispers of steel. He thought of running. For a fleeting moment he saw himself breaking across the flats, child clutched tight, legs pumping until they gave out. But the thought collapsed as quickly as it came. There was nowhere to run. The plains stretched open, bare and pitiless. Every rise a sniper's perch, every shadow a hunter waiting to pounce. He would not get 10 yards before the bullets or the arrows found him. The sheriff's voice rang out again, measured but urgent. Think, boy. They'll cut you down soon as look at you. Best you hand the babe over to me, let me deal with what comes. Don't make yourself the match that lights the prairie. The boy wanted to believe him. He wanted to surrender the burden, to feel the crushing weight lifted from his arms, to crawl back into the shadows of survival. Yet behind the sheriff's words he heard something else, the cold edge of self-preservation. This was not about saving the child. This was about sparing the town. And if the baby's life was the price, the lawman was more than willing to pay it. Then the chief's voice cut through, deep and thunderous. That child carries the blood of my daughter. He belongs to his people, not to thieves and drifters. Give him to me, boy, and your life will be spared. Refuse, and you will be the cause of death for all here. The boy's breath caught. His heart ached with the weight of the words. In that booming tone was both promise and threat, both fatherly claim and warrior's oath. Part of him wanted to bow, to hand the child back to its blood, to believe that would be enough. Yet something gnawed at him, the memory of the woman's final gaze, her hand pressed to his chest, her voice whispering that one word. Why had she chosen him? Why not another? Why not the tribe itself? He shifted his grip, the child squirming in his arms, and whispered under his breath, barely audible, "What am I supposed to do?" His lips trembled, and tears burned the corners of his eyes, but no answer came. Only the steady beat of war drums in the distance, faint but growing, echoing across the plain. His mind flashed with images, the river swallowing the woman, the posse's guns gleaming in the sun, the tribe's warriors painted for battle. His own face reflected in the cracked glass of the saloon's window. Hollow, empty, lost. He felt the pull of both sides like hands tearing him apart. He wanted to scream, to beg for someone else to carry this burden. But no one moved. All eyes were fixed on him, waiting. The sheriff's hand hovered near his revolver. The chief's warriors lowered their spears another inch. The ranchers' rifles glinted with the promise of fire. And the boy, caught in the center, realized the truth. It was not the child's fate that hung in the balance. It was his own soul. The baby whimpered again, soft and plaintive, and the sound broke him open. He leaned his head against the small bundle, whispering with a cracked voice, "I won't let you go. Not to them. Not to anyone." And as the words left his lips, a decision began to harden within him. But the moment he chose would also be the moment blood would spill. The plains seemed to hold their breath, waiting for the spark. The dawn light sharpened, turning the plains into a battlefield of gold and shadow. The boy stood in the eye of the storm, his cabin at his back, the child clutched close, and two armies glaring at one another across the narrow strip of no man's land. The sheriff's voice rang out one last time. This is your choice, Stray. Hand the babe over, or we'll all bleed for nothing. His revolver hung heavy at his side, every muscle in his arm taut. Ready. The chief raised his hand, and 100 spears angled toward the earth. His eyes locked with the boy's, dark and unyielding. Give him to me. Now. The boy's knees trembled, yet his grip did not falter. His voice cracked as he shouted into the silence. He stays with me. The words carried across the flats like a whip crack, startling even himself with their defiance. The world seemed to hold still. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The wind hissed through the grass. The horses stamped their hooves. The baby cried louder, piercing the veil of tension like a church bell ringing in the distance. And then, all at once, the standoff snapped. A rifle barked. No one saw who fired first, whether it was a nervous rancher with sweat on his palms, or a warrior too consumed by grief to wait another second. The shots split the morning, echoing off the ridges, and chaos erupted. The posse dove for cover, rifles cracking in thunderous reply. Warriors surged forward on horseback, their war cries shattering the dawn, spears flashing in the light. The sheriff drew, firing into the storm, his voice lost in the roar. Dust rose in choking clouds, gun smoke burned the air, and the ground shook beneath the pounding of hooves. The boy staggered back against the cabin, clutching the child so tightly he thought he might crush it. Splinters burst from the doorframe as bullets slammed into the wood. A warrior swept past, arrow knocked, only to be cut down by a rancher's shot. Men screamed, horses shrieked. The earth itself seemed to groan under the weight of so much fury. He dropped to his knees, crawling through the dirt as the cabin walls rattled and shook. He wanted to hide, to vanish, but there was no hiding now. Every shout, every scream, every thunderous footfall seemed to drive the truth deeper into him. This bloodshed was his doing. His choice had lit the fuse, and the prairie was burning. A bullet tore through the window, showering him with shards of glass. He flinched, curling around the child, whispering desperately, "I won't let them take you. I swear it. I won't let them." His voice was drowned by the clash outside. Steel against steel, gunfire against bone, vengeance against vengeance. Through the haze of smoke, he saw the sheriff locked in a desperate struggle, revolver blazing, eyes darting toward the cabin as if he still meant to claim the child. He saw the chief astride his horse, face streaked with ash and grief, cutting a path through the fray with fury born of loss. Both men, though enemies, had the same fire burning in their gaze. They would not stop until the boy was stripped of what he held. And as the chaos consumed the plains, as the cries of the dying rose with the smoke, the boy clutched the child tighter and whispered a prayer he did not know how to finish. His heart pounded, his vision blurred, yet one truth seared itself into him. There was no way out that left him whole. The door shuddered as a heavy weight slammed against it. Outside, voices rose, one in English, one in the tongue of the people, both demanding the same thing: "Give the child!" The boy backed deeper into the cabin, breath ragged, eyes wild. The lantern's flame guttered, casting the room in shadows. He raised his head, looked at the crooked door splintering before him, and felt the world closing in. The last sound was the child's cry, sharp and unrelenting, as the door burst inward. And then darkness. If this story moved you, press subscribe button and turn on notifications to stay updated.